All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I would like to open this evening by reading our Indigenous Peoples Acknowledgement. As Crystal Bridges and the Momentary, we recognize our role as settlers and guests in the Northwest Arkansas region. We acknowledge the Caddo, Quapaw, and Osage, as well as the many Indigenous caretakers of this land and water. We appreciate the enduring influence of the vibrant, diverse, and contemporary cultures of Indigenous peoples. We are conscious of the role in colonization that museums have played. As cultural institutions, we have a responsibility to engage in the dismantling of historical and systemic invisibility of Indigenous peoples past, present, and future. We choose to intentionally hold ourselves accountable to appropriate conversation, representation, connection, and education to facilitate a space of measurable change. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speakers this evening. We have joining us Ronald Jackson, who is an artist in our collection at Crystal Bridges. Growing up in rural south of Arkansas Delta, Jackson was the youngest of 11 kids born to a farmer and a community organizer. His mother and father left a legacy of challenging and reshaping the norms of the racial status quo in his surrounding home communities. Despite suffering continual threats, harassment, and organized retaliations, efforts eventually led to a U.S. Court of Appeals decision ruling in the favor of forcing the area school districts into full desegregation. Jackson studied architecture at Saddleback College in Mission Viejo, California, before joining the U.S. Army. He served 21 plus years in the Army and retired in 2014. Midway in his military career, he began a pursuit of becoming a professional artist. With no access to art school, Jackson engaged himself on a journey of self-disciplines and personal discovery to realize this goal as a self-taught artist. The military afforded him the experience of living in places such as South Korea, Belgium, Italy, Germany, Iraq, and Kuwait. He believes that the culture of his childhood upbringing and the experience of being immersed into other societies as an adult has given him a broad perspective on life and the complex challenges that we all face. I would love for y'all to join me in welcoming Ronald Jackson. And our next guest tonight, we have Scott Lunsford, who is from the Pryor Center at the University of Arkansas. Scott Lunsford was born and raised in Fayetteville. Scott is class of 70 FHS graduate and has an art degree from the University of Arkansas. A musician since junior high, by his college years, Scott's music career had moved to establishing a local recording studio, Sequoia Recording, next door to the Ozark Lanes Bowling Alley in Fayetteville. The U of A hired him in 1985 to help with continuing education's media services in what is now the Global Campus building on the Fayetteville Square. Scott then spent 17 years there before moving to the University Relations to work with the campaign for the 21st century.
She had never smoked. With a newborn and no paid leave, Christina was only able to make 3 brief trips. 2 nights ago, her mom lost.
Scott spent 17 years there before moving to University Relations to work with the campaign for the 21st century, $1 billion success. He then helped to expand the Pryor Center for Arkansas Oral and Visual History to include high-definition video interviews and develop online access of the materials. Scott has now been with the Pryor Center for the past 15 years, where he has conducted nearly 250 interviews, helped design the workflow through changing technologies, and believes he has the best job in the world. So please welcome Scott Lunsford. And Ronald, I am going to turn it over to you to open up our speaker series this evening.
Well, it starts this quick and I'm on the mic. So first of all, I want to say thank you all for being a part of this presentation. I hope you get something out of it that could be useful. And I'm going to jump right into it. I'm presently in my studio. And I have a few things on a slide to share with you. And let's get right into it. I'm going to share my screen and start the presentation. Okay, that is not. Let's get started. Okay, Educator Speakers Series. People, stories, memories, and events of the past, and us. And I'm going to just share a little bit about my artwork and how it relates to my interest of stories, my interest of people and events and things of the past. I think most of us know these three individuals. Of course, these are individuals that have passed within the recent years, the last couple of years. I'm sure I don't have to give you their names. Alex Trebek, a TV personality that I'm sure we've spent some time with and have in some way affected our lives, whether it's by being entertained. And then there's Colin Powell, former wartime commanding general turned Secretary of State. And of course, let me go back. And of course, there is Kobe Bryant, a 5-time NBA champion. And his life and each of their lives have impacted ours or many of us in various ways. And if I move forward to these gentlemen here, and I'm sure the faces that are shown here, many of you may have ideas of who they are, looking at individuals further in the past that were instrumental in shaping our American identity as innovators of America. And give you a few more seconds to figure out if you are aware of any of these 4 individuals. And of course, without further ado, we have Henry Ford, we have Thomas Edison, and Alexander Graham Bell. And we all are aware of their contribution to the American landscape and today their innovations and their inventions affect our everyday life, and we are grateful to that. Beyond individuals that have lived life in the public's eye, as Alex Trebek, Colin Powell to some extent, and even more so, Kobe Bryant. We are somewhat familiar with them and can likely share stories or ideas about each one. But do we really know those individuals? And I would go on to say that most likely we probably don't know many or most of the intimate elements of their life and what they meant to different people around them. Who is this lady here? Katherine Johnson. Katherine Johnson is a person that I feel is worth noting, along with Mary Winston Jackson. And some of you may know where I'm going with this already. Anyone out there? Did I hear someone make a comment? Okay. Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan. If you do not know about these three ladies, very influential, impactful women in America's history, not only just women, but African-American women who were instrumental in this person's legacy, John Glenn, and these women were featured in the 2016 movie Hidden Figures, which they were the human computers, or what they were called at the time before there were actual mechanical computers. They did the calculations that helped allow John Glenn to be the first American to orbit the Earth, and afterwards help astronauts go to the moon and other accomplishments. So these women have significant contributions to American society, and also stories that is worthy to be told and celebrated. But for me as an artist, I believe that every person, whether they have contributed in some noteworthy way, we all have stories. We all have stories of experiences in life, and a lot of times, many of those stories are interesting enough if we took the time to learn of the uniqueness of different ones' experiences, and they're small, if not great, contributions to society, if not society, to their families and their communities. So that is the thing that I am interested in. So people, stories, memories, events of the past, and why us. I think why us, or why we should take interest in people, their stories, is because people of the past can be incredibly inspiring, to motivate us and inspire us to achieve our best. And also, I think it is really difficult to be inspired by people of the future. That's a little joke there, but this is me in my studio. I make paintings of portraits, I would say. We'll call them portraits, but it's been my challenge to use portraiture to introduce narrative, introduce stories. And it's my intent or effort to pretty much create a collaborative exercise or with the viewer. And that is something that we are hopefully going to try together in this at some point during this presentation. These are two paintings that I did, and I usually refer to people of the past. And these are mostly people out of my imagination. They're not a specific person, and also they don't have a specific story. That's where I seek to partner with the viewer to contribute to the stories, the narrative of the paintings. I also give the paintings a more elaborate title, as you see here. He was a crusader of the voiceless, and he played the clarinet. That is a starting point for me to engage with the viewer, to ponder about what their story was, or who they were as a person. And I also incorporate masks with the portraits to to suggest that there is some element of mystery to be uncovered or discovered by the viewer. And it's for the viewer to use their creative efforts to speculate who the people are, what their stories were. These are two similar. She sang a song no one would hear, and also Today She Watches. These are additional portraits that I did in 2000, I think it was 2019. Her mother confided in her secrets. Some wore the skin of Invisible Man and Revelation of Invisible Man. Now, this is a painting that is a part of the Crystal Bridges exhibition that opened 2020. It was with an additional painting that I did, but this one is called The Legend of Albert King, a Grave Digger. And I like using the idea of creating narrative, speculating stories, even if the stories are fictional. I think it's beneficial or it has value in attributing to people's humanity, and when we can take on an exercise and attribute value to a person, speculate the value that they have to their loved ones, what potential experiences that they have. And a lot of times when we consider those people that came before us, they lived in a society or a world that had different challenges than we do. So this is a exercise that we're going to engage in using this image a little later. But I want to give you an example of the collaborative engagement that I seek to engage with the viewer viewing my work, starting with the title, The Legend of Albert King. And if one person of a group can just add one sentence and create a collaborative effort to make a story, it could potentially go something like this. Albert, or The Legend of Albert King, a gravedigger. He lived near a bluff where two roads crossed. On sunny days, shadows from the trees divided the roads in segments. He owned a light blue truck, but most only saw him walk. With his shovel, he carried as a cane, digging holes at every stop. I was on the road when he came near, dressed clean with dirty shoes. I introduced myself and extended my hand to the man, tall and lean. He opened his mouth and responded to me. My name is Albert King. So this is simply just a story of ideas, potential narratives that just by looking at an image or looking at a person depicted by an image and imagining their story, imagining their experience. And I think it could be a noteworthy exercise in broadening our humanity when we give attributes to people that may not be widely known. It may not be a TV personality, a wartime general or secretary of defense, or a four-time NBA champion. Just simple people like any of the people in our past have a story. And I think it's important for us to consider their impact in society. And there were likely many people in their lives that saw them as uniquely and incredibly special. So that is the end of my presentation. And before Sally takes over, if there are any questions, I will be happy to answer. Okay, I guess it's to you, Sally. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Ronald. And Scott, I'd love to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about the Pryor Center and your work collecting oral histories.
Great. Thank you, Ronald. That was a very great presentation. I love the idea of the story telling, however fictional it may be, and all the twists and turns that are available in any given story. What I'd like to do is I'm going to start with, I think I'll start with the Pryor Center website. If I can bring this up. Let's see. Here we go. Is everyone able to see that, I hope? So I have to, it is, I think I do have the best job in the world, and I get to work with some of the best people in the world. The Pryor Center is a relatively small staff, but everyone shares in almost all the aspects of what it takes to make the Pryor Center work. We're downtown on the Fayetteville Square. The building itself that we're in covers the entire east side. So it's a very, the space that we are in was custom built for us. It was a redesign from a former bank building. We have 6 edit suites, an interview vault where we can do interviews on site, and we do presentations out in the main part of our space. It's just a really magnificent home. I would like to show a few areas that are available on this website. And you can get to it by just simply Googling Pryor Center, and we come up. One of our, the Arkansas Memories Project is really kind of where the visual side of the Pryor Center started. And what's different about this oral history program, it was started by Senator David and Barbara Pryor with leftover campaign money when he retired from the Senate. And they wanted to do an oral history program. They were inspired by the LSU program, but they wanted it to be moving image. And so what you see here are still frames of some of the folks that we have interviewed. We're still posting interviews. There's still interviews in production now, but you can see it's pretty broad. There's a lot of folks here. And I can say that during our interviews, we have someone that is also scanning the family photo albums. So you'll see some of those scans superimposed with these freeze frames from the interviews. It's very, it's just a magical event anytime that we get to interview everyone. Let me go to, let's go to the KATV collection. Now this, I like to say, is really the elephant in the room. David Pryor negotiated with Channel 7 to preserve their tape collection of 26,000 hours. There were a few thousand hours of film, 16 millimeter film. We've had that digitized, and it's all preserved now. So you can see that it's still in progress. We're still adding more storage. It takes quite a bit of storage to store 26,000 hours of moving image. But you can search this, and I do want to search one item for you. Let's try Johnny Cash. All right, so here are these things that we have posted, these reels that we have posted. These are the items that come up when you when you search for Johnny Cash. And right here is Johnny Cash playing at Cummings Prison. So we can click on that, and you should come up here in just a moment with the here he is. I don't know. Here we go.
Just remember to try to send some of our dollars back down to kind of help us look.
So this is a television coverage of the concert with Johnny Cash, and so you have to keep in mind this is not strictly oral history. This is actually broadcast history. So you can go to, once you hit a reel, the reels are about an hour long, and they represent the broadcast of that particular day. So now we've moved on to something else. Anyway, it's a fascinating addition to the Pryor Center. It's very aggressive work, and we're really proud of it. And I think that you'll enjoy seeing it too. We also have a student initiative called the Arkansas Story Vault. And this is driven by students. They do the interviewing, they do the recording, they do most of the editing all the time with some supervision from Pryor Center staff. But it's a wonderful opportunity for university students that have an interest in history to go out on the street, to go to the events, to go to the programs and do the interviews and learn how to edit the interviews, preserve the interviews. So it's a very robust program. So let me go back. I want to stop share here. And then I want to go to a share screen again. And this time we'll go to a keynote. If I can bring this up. Yeah, I've just given you a little tour of the Pryor Center. The first segment I want to share with you is with Joycelyn Elders. And I want to highlight the difference between having an oral history in front of you that is a transcript, which was where oral history first started. And of course, that was dependent on what the person heard during the interview, and it was usually on a some kind of tape recorder. And sometimes the interview, what was written down and transcribed, didn't first of all cover the entire interview. It was kind of left up to the transcriptionist or the person that had done the recording to transcribe what they thought was important. And there are a number of things that just cannot quite come through on a transcription. If you were lucky, later on, you could actually have access to the recordings. And they were usually on site at whatever repository had the recordings. You had to reserve time. You couldn't take the recordings home with you. You were kind of supervised because the recordings were valuable, like a special collections in a library. So even with that, even with a transcript in front of you, even with an audio recording, you really are not in the same room. You're still kind of imagining, and you're still left up with what was left of the recording or what was preserved in the recording, and whatever that editor felt like was important. So with the introduction of moving image, you get a chance to get all kinds of visual cues that do not appear in a transcript or rarely appear in a transcript and are only hinted in audio recordings. So let's go to Joycelyn Elders here. And here's a little background on her. I'll give you a moment to read this. She's quite remarkable. Keep in mind that this event happens in her home. So during this segment, it starts with what I would call a medium close-up, head and shoulders shot of the person being interviewed. But about 13 seconds into it, the camera starts to pull back. So you get a wider image of her living space. And you get a few more cues as to what she holds dear, what she lives with, what is in her home. So it's a remarkable glimpse, a very personal glimpse of Joycelyn. So I'll go ahead and play this and see what you think.
They didn't have any place for hospitalized Black children. So, when you got sick, you went to the doctor's office and you waited all day until all the white patients were seen. And then he would see the Black patients. And so when he got to my brother, he said the only thing he could do is open it, and I remember there was a big red tube hanging out of my brother's abdomen when he came back home. But can you imagine going 13 miles on the back of a mule? How awful that must have been. And then back home. My brother lived and became a veterinarian.
So I think you could see how intimate these prior center interviews can be. She really opens up and tells a very early story in her life, witnessing, firsthand witnessing of what happened to her brother and how he overcame that and went on to have his own career. The next person I want to share with you, this is Harry Ward. Now this entire interview is in his home as well. So you're being brought into where he lives and what he holds dear. He's not in good health here. He's actually he's surviving on about 30% capacity for the oxygen. So it takes a while for him to get enough strength to talk. And in this story, I'll go ahead and show you, there's a background here. But in this story, he's going to be talking about a moment that he had with Jack Stevens, who was oil man in Arkansas and investment banker. And he's going to be asking for a donation from Jack Stevens. So I'll just go ahead and play this. And I think you can appreciate how magnificent this man is and how generous he is, and even giving this interview. It's quite the gift to the Prior Center.
And I made a presentation and requested Jack Stevens consider a gift of $15 million for the Neuroscience Center. Jack said, well, how tall is he? We're sitting in his living room. He says, how tall is that cancer center? I'm sorry, the cancer center is 12 floors. I'm sorry. So we had 8 floors on it. The 12 floors. And I said, well, it's 12 floors. Well, I want my building to be a little higher. How much will that cost? Using my great mathematical wisdom, I figured 4 floors. It's 15 million. 12 floors, 45 million. So I said, well, it should be around 45 million. So I sat there for about 15 seconds. Went back and forth. Margaret, write the doctor a check for 45 million. It's out. The biggest gift I ever received. The neuroscience building, the Jack Stevens neuroscience building. His generosity is just incredible. I choke up thinking about it.
And of course, he does choke up there at the end. Next up is Betty Bumpers. Most of you would know that she was the wife of Senator Dale Bumpers from Arkansas, who happened to be Senator David Pryor's best friend. And this is in her home. And not only is it a great intimate story of her childhood and her father and that relationship in the house, there is a moment, there is an action moment in this clip that would be very hard to explain in a transcript, and you would not, of course, be able to see it in an audio recording. And so it's so much fun to see this motion, this activity that takes place. So I'll go ahead and play this for you. Oh, and here's a little, not only, of course, was she a great gal, a wonderful person, but she started a vaccination program in Arkansas, No Children Left Behind, in '74, I think, and it was immunizing children in Arkansas. And it worked so well that during the Carter administration, she and Rosalind Carter expanded the program to cover the entire nation. So at a time now when vaccinations are so controversial, those two women saved many, many lives. And we're talking lives of children. And then on top of that, you can see on the screen that she helped found Peace Links. And this was an effort to increase communication between the women of the United States and the women of Russia, thinking that, if we could just talk, the Cold War wouldn't be so hazardous. And then on top of that, she helped promote the AIDS vaccine and led President Clinton to begin the Vaccine Research Center in 1999. Quite a remarkable woman, but enjoy this movement that you get to see here from Betty Bumpers.
That house had 2-3 outside doors to it. And my dad was, around a lot, be out the farm, which was out of about 1.5 miles out of town. And anytime he would come in, we would wear shorts, had shorts, but we had skirts. It was the fashion, and you had wear shorts and you had a skirt that would go over. And so we had a skirt and a dust cloth by every door, outside door. Because the minute he drove up and came in the door, we grabbed it. If we were sitting around, lolling around, doing nothing, we'd jump up, put that skirt on quickly and act like we were dusting furniture. Because if he came in and we weren't busy, he called us trifling. Trifling. And to this day, I cannot sit down and read comfortably. During the daytime, I find myself tensing up, you know, I have to say, it's okay, it's okay. You can read all day, you know, loll around and read all day if you want to, but that old tape is still going in my head. That, you know, if you're not doing something constructive, you're trifling.
Next up is George Takei. This is not in his home. This is in the Arlington Hotel in Hot Springs, Arkansas. He is a participant in the Hot Springs Film Festival. And we were allowed, the Prior Center was allowed to come down and interview some of the participants. And of course, when these interviews start, their managers and the folks we're interviewing, you know, they say, okay, we'll give you 15 minutes. And they end up giving us 45 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes, because people like, folks have stories to tell. And this is a tragic story. He actually lived in Arkansas for a year, his 5th year, in a Japanese internment camp during World War II. So he starts in Los Angeles, and they, let me give you this little, this probably says it more succinctly than I can, but this is how he ended up coming to Arkansas. And of course, everyone knows George Takei mostly for his role as Lieutenant Sulu in the Star Trek television series. But he's quite the social activist, and a very strong one. So I'll let him tell this story for you now.
I celebrated my 5th birthday, and it was a few weeks after my birthday that the soldiers came. My brother and I were in the living room looking out the front window, and we saw 2 soldiers marching up our driveway. And I remember the sunlight flashing on their bayonets. They stomped at the front porch, banged on the door. My father answered it, and literally at gunpoint, we were ordered out of our home. And we went out and we stood on the driveway waiting for my mother to come out. And when she finally emerged from the house, she had the baby in one arm, a great big huge duffel bag in the other, and tears were streaming down her cheek.
And so you end up in a place called Rohwer,
R-O-H-W-E-R.
And that's in southeastern Arkansas.
Southeastern Arkansas, and locked up. But then, after a year, the government realized there's a wartime manpower shortage. And here are all these people, young people that we've called enemy non-aliens. How do we tap them? And the amazing thing is, thousands of young Japanese American men and women went from behind those barbed wire fences, leaving their family in imprisonment to fight for this country. But there's another stinging irony to this story. Those that perished on those bloody battlefields and had their coffins covered with the American flag, those flags were brought back to their wives or their parents, still behind American barbed wire fences. Those incredible, crazy young men who went from that camp and fought and died for this country. They were the greatest generation. And these young men whose names are there on the base of that monument
were extraordinarily, uncommonly great. They made my America possible.
And if I can stop sharing, I'll try to stop sharing. If I can. Probably get into that. There we go. Okay. And that's pretty much it. Are we to take questions now, Sally? I don't know what to do.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can, Sally.
Mhm.
Okay, my whole screen has whited out, so I just happened to click in the right place to where the microphone would be. So Kim, if you will be my eyes, I cannot actually see anything except for the captioning. But yes, to your point, Scott, we do have some questions. So I wanted to start out with a question for Ronald. Ronald, when we first spoke, when we were creating the idea for this program, you used a phrase that has really stuck with me, and that was the beautiful existence of life beyond the struggle. Would you tell us a little bit about this idea and the role that personal stories play in your works of art?
Sure, Sally. I think I expressed that because a big part of my family's history was involved in the civil rights era, and being involved in it locally in Arkansas, there were a number of challenges that my family, my parents faced during that time, which represented similar challenges that was faced by people of the likes across the South. And as an artist, a lot of those things influenced me and has established some value systems of which shape who I am and the things that are important to me. And I want to express some of those things in my work. But I realized that when we talk about, say, African Americans in the South pre-60s or further, the greater narrative of the discussion is around the struggles of post-slavery, Jim Crow, and civil rights struggles. And besides that, or outside of that experience, there are unique experiences, more intimate experiences of individuals living in that situation that did things. They lived, they loved, they were innovative. They inspired to do a number of things, and they did a lot of things. There were a lot of talent and creatives that flourished despite the greater narrative of struggle. So it's been my effort to kind of dig or peer into a more intimate experience of people, who they were, and just like any of us, we are all people that desire many of the same things. We want to be loved. We want to enjoy our family, and we have individual dreams and aspirations, and we all have those things, and those are some of the stories that I am interested in, and giving more of a human story outside of the struggles that a lot of times the narrative shapes different ones' experiences with a struggle, as opposed to being people that had something specifically unique and interesting about them. So that is what I meant, and I like to discover those things just talking with people, or talking with older previous generations about different things of my ancestors, my grandparents, not really seeking to find out in what other way that they struggled, but wanting to know something unique that could potentially inspire me about the personality or what make each person who they are.
Thank you so much for sharing that with everyone. You know, when you talk about inspiration, it makes me think about your earlier comment about not being inspired by people in the future. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. And Scott, a question I had for you was, you know, we saw in your presentation that your work centers largely on the collection of oral histories. And so I'm curious, what sort of information do you hope to get when you're collecting an oral history? And do you have a particular template or questions that you use when you're conducting these interviews?
There is a fairly loose template. It's usually based upon an entire life. I like to start with the earliest memories. I like to hear the oldest stories that the interview may have heard, may have witnessed. I like to ask about their parents and their grandparents and the time that they've spent with the older generations, any remarkable things they saw or shared with the older generations. But also each interview, we take nominations. Folks nominate people to be interviewed by the Pryor Center. And, you know, I do research before each interview. I try to not cover ground that is already out there. It's already that the interviewee has already told their story. Or, you know, I look for things that are more personal. It's, you know, and we don't always interview people. Most of the time, most of our interviews are people that no one's ever heard of, but they have, because of the nomination, there is evidence that they've done something that helped shape their community or change lives for people, helped in some way, or they inspired someone to nominate them because of what they have done, and felt like more people should know about it. And those stories makes the interviewee more accessible and more human. The more famous the person is, the less likely you are to know much about their personal life. So I find that the conversations generally take on their own template in real time. That my job is mostly to listen. And the less that I can talk and the less questions that I have to ask, the more the story flows, the more open the person gets. I can say that our interviews in the beginning, we were really concerned about getting as many interviews as possible because most of our interviewees are of the older generation. And there was an effort to catch as many stories before the stories pass. So we were wide open as to what the people wanted to talk about and share their lives. So these interviews initially were very long. It was not unusual for them to be 7 or 8 hours in length.
Wow.
As I got to be a better interviewer and more sensitive to the folks that I was interviewing, we were able to whittle that time down just a little bit to make it more manageable. I mean, the longer the interview, the longer it takes to process it, and the longer it takes to transcribe it. If any of you know anything about transcription, it's a painstaking process. And there are not any well-polished artificial intelligence ways to do a transcript. You still have to edit the transcript, even with the best software that's available. And then, of course, there's video editing, and the video editing at the Pryor Center does not really do much cutting of the interview. It places what we call chapter markers now. And when we first started, the chapter markers would not follow with the web version of the interview. So we were forced to provide highlights but a complete transcript of the interview. So researchers and documentarians, they could always rely on the transcript for the content in the interview. And of course, it takes much less time to read a transcript than it does to watch an interview, a lengthy interview. So they could search for topics within the transcript, and that proved to be very, very handy. And it's still, I think, the most relative part of research for oral historians. It's and documentarians. You've got to know what's in the content of the interview as painlessly as you can get to it. But I will say that the motion image of the interviews really highlights the human qualities of storytelling. So yeah, there is a rough template. It's mostly being empathetic and listening carefully and urging the story to continue. Not totally unlike the exercise that Ronald was giving us earlier, although the cues are basically provided by one person. Anyway, that's kind of the working template.
Thank you. And can I ask a follow-up question? I'm curious what it's like for you as the interviewer to listen to people tell their personal stories.
Well, I'm pretty much a mess. I will confess that just watching television, I will cry during a commercial. So if there's something on the screen that touches me, I openly tear up. And so when I'm across from someone and they're pouring their heart out to me, and they grab me in a way that I'm experiencing what it is they went through. I've been known to tear up myself during an interview, and I try not to. I think that the most important thing is for me, and how it affects me, is maintaining eye contact with the interviewee. The moment that you lose the eye contact, you've left the room that you're in. You're no longer a partner with the story. You're just someone sitting in a room while someone's talking. So the eye contact, I think, is that and listening are the two most important things for an interview to be successful. Yes, you need to know something about the person that you're interviewing beforehand. I gather that from an initial telephone call with the person, talking with the folks that have nominated the person. Sometimes I'll find out who their closest friends were, who influenced them early in their lives. I'll try to get a hold of those folks to get a brief outline of their experiences with them. And then, of course, there's also the ever-invasive internet. There's so much out there, and that really helps me narrow the question field. Because I really don't want to waste their time repeating questions that they've already answered.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And it's interesting because you mentioned that part of what's really important is having a sense of empathy, close listening. But I also love that you mentioned eye contact, which makes me think back to Ronald's works, right? Ronald, your figures in your works of art do make direct eye contact with the audience. And so I would love to, as we as an audience make contact with one of Ronald's works of art, I would love to open it up to the whole audience for the interactive storytelling exercise that Ronald mentioned earlier. So Kim, if you would please share that image and the title of the work. And Kim, I'm going to ask you to please, once our narrative has been gathered in the chat, if you will please read it to us. But so Ronald, you talk about the people in your paintings and your titles, and you kind of hint about those people with your titles. And what I love is when we were talking about this exercise, talking about that sense of intrigue. And so to the audience, our prompt is that we would like to try a collaborative writing experiment with you all. So Kim has shared an image of one of Ronald's works of art with the title, and Ronald has shared with us kind of what a sample narrative could look like. So I'd love for each of you to take a few moments to silently reflect on this work of art and the title. And then we're going to use this title as the basis to build a group story. So if you would like to participate, then what I'm going to have you do is, as it comes to you, drop one sentence into the chat, and we'll watch as this story builds in our chat.
Sally?
Yes.
Yeah, could I just reiterate that it's an experiment that I plan on doing with a upcoming show that I will have next year to have the viewers enter into a further engagement with my work. And a lot of times there are other creatives that take interest in the visual arts, you know, such as writers, poets, and things that have a way with words that can add another dimension or element to visual art. And with this exercise, I think it would be fun. There's no need to have it flow so perfectly together. I think it would be interesting just to see how different ideas coming together could create a direction or a potential story, even if it's quirky, because of the different participants, and people would likely or potentially respond to the same previous entry. And yeah, I'm just interested to see what the other people may contribute to this title or this one-liner as a basis to start a narrative.
Thank you so much for sharing that context, Ronald. I appreciate it.
Sure. And while we are doing this, I am also open and available to answer any questions that may come up on the chat.
Ronald, while everybody's inputting their questions and or their responses, but we do have a question that came up. Can you talk about your decision process or inspiration for patterns and color palettes when formulating a piece?
Hey, Ronald, you're on mute. Sorry.
Wow, I just gave the complete answer without. But I was just on a podcast that aired yesterday, and I spoke about the influence of quilts that was prevalent around me in different homes when I was growing up, and was thinking concluding that the quilts in some way influenced me or inspired me to take an interest in patterns. And in a lot of my work, you may see a leaf-like motif in the background, and I have also stated on occasions in presentations stating that I'm not a urban artist, because a lot of the art world is within the urban centers of society, and the New York cities and places where the big museums and the studios where artists work, and they go there to be inspired. But on the contrast, I consider myself not to be an urban artist, but I draw inspirations from a time of the past. And for the African-American experience in the United States of being mostly centered in the southern states and in non-urban or rural existences, I use this leaf-like motif, which is basically a pattern to represent a non-urban environment. So generally with my works, I choose never to introduce an item in my work that gives a reference to urban life. And I use this leaf-like pattern or motif to represent a non-urban environment, I would say. I don't know how much of the question that answered.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Sure.
We're getting some really good responses, and I don't want to miss out. So I think I'm going to start reading them, and people can continue to input their responses. We'll keep this momentum going. But let me scroll back up to the top here, because we got a good start. First of all, I'd love to say I love Lori West's comment. The eye contact from Ronald Jackson's paintings just doesn't let up either. She loves the comparison between two of these guests. So Lori actually started off our response here for our story. The color he loved, red, was always just beyond his reach. No one wanted to see that color on the end of his shovel. Albert was born a king, but he didn't live like one. Always the one to provide the final resting place. Layer upon layer, he would cover and cover. With his wool jacket, he would survive the cold. Although Albert's hands were calloused and sore, he was determined to perform his job with precision and dignity. Albert always said, "My work is important. I want my client to rest well. The families need my work and my care for their loved ones." As Al lurked, eyes glowing in the moonlight, as he flowed the twilight path to his secret sanctuary, a small cabin deep in the Ouachita Mountains. Determined to stand out through his life, is bound by ashes to ashes. Gravedigger would not have been on my list of possibilities if the title were not shared. I wonder if it would have been on Mr. King's list if not assigned. His passive gaze reflected his status in his community. And still, his nails remained unscathed.
Wow, that is amazing. That's very interesting. I really love it.
That was great. Oh my gosh. Kim, do we have any other comments that are being added in?
I'm not seeing any yet, but there's still time. Still time now.
There is still time. Yes, people can still add to it. I do want to ask a couple more questions before we run out of time. So thank you everyone for participating. That was such a beautiful story that emerged out of your viewing of this work of art. So I'd asked questions earlier to Ronald and Scott individually, but I have a couple of questions that I really want to ask, and both of them respond to. But we've talked a lot about personal stories tonight, and I would love to ask each of you what you consider to be the value of personal stories and the importance of collecting them.
Well, should I go?
Sure.
So I think part of the motive that David and Barbara Pryor had in mind when they started the Pryor Center, they had traveled to every county, nearly every town in Arkansas over his long political career. And what they loved most about that were the stories that people told. And I think what they came away with was something very positive, something unknown to anyone outside of those communities. And what emerged was an image of Arkansas that was totally contrary to the age-old, poor, barefoot, uneducated, not necessarily clean living folks. What came across was how much they cared about their quality of life and the folks around them, and family first, and even patriotic in the best sense of the word. What was good for everyone, what they could do to make life better. So I think the importance of gathering stories is what you learn from them and what inspires you to do from the stories that you hear or that you read or that you see. I think it's an opportunity for a group voice that is not calculated. Rather, it's discovered in the most, how would I say that? In the most innocent ways, an urging to learn and to understand. So yeah, I think it's very important to gather stories. And I think it's important that the stories that you gather are ones that inspire and that you learn from, that help you in some way.
Thank you, Scott. And Ronald, did you have something you would like to share?
Yes, I definitely agree with Scott on the idea that stories stories are another way to educate ourselves or one another in an array of different experiences, and we can come away with a deeper understanding of a variety of things just by hearing it from a perspective of someone else's story. I think from collecting, archiving stories, it can be an inspiration for us to guide us in our endeavors, especially when you invest in the stories of people that have experienced a wealth of life beyond what we may have experienced. And another thing is oftentimes the experiences or the stories of influential people that have made specific accomplishments within society. Those stories are often promoted, especially in school, for students to learn of different individuals of American history. But I would like to suggest that young people, students, are encouraged to inquire of people that may not be famous or have contributed in some great way in society. Even start with your grandparents. As Scott was talking, he mentioned that he likes to get references of the interviewee speaking about their earliest memories of their grandparents or great grandparents, if that is possible. And if we can encourage our youth or even ourselves to, while the opportunity is there, to invest in learning about the experiences of those that are closest to us before life takes them away. And when that happens, those stories and those memories fade away with them. So if we can do what we can to archive and capture some of those stories, I think it is rewarding for us to or inspiring for us in moving forward with our own lives and valuing those before us. Yeah.
Thank you, Ronald. And thank you both so much for being so open with sharing about personal stories. Ronald sharing your art, Scott sharing about collecting oral and visual histories. We have just a few moments left, and I would love to just open up the floor to any questions that we have from the audience. And y'all just feel free to come off mute.
Of course, chatty me, I've got to just say, I am so struck by the audacity of your work, Mr. Jackson. I teach children, and so your work is so straight in your face. I absolutely am blown away by the fact that there's something about the mask that makes me want to know that person even more. There's a daring to it. It's got so many sorts of emotional responses from me. A daringness, a mystery, a whimsy, a veil, a scrim, no, you'll never know me. It's just got multiple layers to it. So just, I don't know that there's a question in there, but just thank you so much. And Scott, just amazing. And the two of y'all together with the idea of narrative and story and what came before, and just amazing. So.
Hey, could I quickly add that of course I was in the military and 2 tours in Iraq. One of the things that I would do as a practice to pretty much just keep me grounded while I was there in a hostile environment. I would every day take the Stars and Stripes paper, and I would go to the section that showed the fallen soldiers. It would have their photograph and a short write-up, just like a obituary. But I would make it a practice of daily looking at the person and imagining, speculating their value, the loss that their families and loved ones had. Whether I would see different individuals and I would imagine that, man, this is a person that I could have potentially been friends with. And just looking at the straightforward picture of that person, it became an exercise in which I started giving them value. They were beyond not just a statistic of someone that was fell in combat, but I gave my time to them and gave my respects by acknowledging their humanity and that someone lost someone. So in that same light, I take these portraits that are looking straight ahead, as unlike a lot of portraits or art, you're advised not to just in the center of the canvas and looking straight ahead. That is something you don't do, but there's a power to that. And with the mask, just as the Lone Ranger, who is that masked man or any person wearing a mask, it creates a human curiosity. It's like, okay, I'm not seeing everything. And that curiosity that we have, we know that there's something that I'm not satisfied walking away. I want to know more. So I found that adds and invites the viewer to engage a little longer than they normally would if that mask wasn't there. So yeah, I appreciate the comments.
Ronald, that's a spectacular oral history answer. It gave us the history of the gaze and the history of your study. So it really puts your work in a new perspective for everybody. That's a great answer.
Thank you.
All right, we have about a minute. Any other questions?
I just wanted to make a comment really quickly, if that's okay. So what I appreciate from both of you, and what I am getting a lot from this, which has been wonderful, is just the idea of empathy and just really kind of understanding not only how the world works, but how individuals work within the world. And I love the idea of kind of telling stories and delving in and finding out about people. And I think the both of you do a wonderful job in kind of going back in the past, but also kind of speculating also Ronald's work. And I just think it's fascinating. I think it's an area in art and outside of art that really needs to be untapped more, the lived experience and that sort of thing. So thank you. That's just my 2 cents.
All right.
Great honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that puts us at time. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us. If you haven't already dropped into the chat, if you're needing PD credit this evening, please, if you would drop into the chat, you can direct message me your name and your email address so that I can send out your certificate. And then I've also dropped a link into the chat for a really short survey. If y'all would do me the honor of filling that out, that would be great. It helps me to make my programming better. And that is all I have to say. Ronald and Scott, thank you so very much for joining us this evening. And audience, thank you for participating.
Thank you.
I hope everyone has a great night.
Well, thank
Good
you.
to see you
Have a
all.
great week.
Stay strong.
Thank you.